Hello everyone. This is Philippa Benson, the Managing Editor of CABI Agriculture and Bioscience, CABI's open access multidisciplinary journal. Today, our webinar is focused on writing effective cover letters and the many issues involved. This presentation is supported by CABI, a not-for-profit intergovernmental organization established in 1910 by a UN treaty. CABI provides scientific expertise and information about agriculture and the environment around the world and specializes in scientific publishing and international development. CABI is run by 48 member countries and has over 400 staff working worldwide in 21 different locations. Today, we'll discuss a number of different issues, including the importance of understanding differences among journals and editorial boards when you're drafting a cover letter, the ideal length of a cover letter, and the ideal structure of a cover letter. We'll go over in detail what information should and should not go in a cover letter, and we provide you with some additional resources on improving your written English and have a quick review of the top reasons that manuscripts are rejected. I like to begin with a reminder of starting each writing task by taking a high-level view of the full cycle of generating new knowledge in science, and keeping in mind the many different audiences that come into play and overlap through the research cycle. These audiences are stakeholders who are critical to professional success and should be kept in front of mind whenever possible. All writers, including scientists, often focus on only a subset of these audiences when engaged in a specific writing task, whether it is while compiling notes and ideas while conducting research, collaborating with others while drafting a manuscript, tailoring files and a cover letter in preparation to submit for a particular journal, revising manuscripts and responding to reviewer comments, engaging in post-publication activities with other researchers and the public, preparing new materials for presentations and professional meetings, and then developing new ideas for research, designing that research, generating a grant proposal, securing funding, and the many other writing tasks in between. It's authentically important to remember that all stakeholders will be impacted by the decisions you make throughout the research and publication process, whether directly or indirectly, sooner or later. So, when looking at your readers of your final manuscript, it's important also to think beyond those who are working to further define and solve similar questions to those that you're addressing. You also want to think about your broader set of colleagues and co-authors in your institution and other institutions and their concerns. Institutional leaders will also be critical audiences as they want to register your productivity as part of their community, and they can help you in promoting you and your work. These institutional players can also become involved if there are any questions related to the ethical practices or use of funds in your research or publishing. When it comes to the publication process, of course, you want to think about the editors and the editorial structures of journals you submit to, as well as to the publishers of those journals, making sure that they're transparent and committed to best practices and have access to the most advanced technologies for indexing and disseminating your content. You also want to think about your readers in the role of reviewers of your work, those experts who will assess the quality of your manuscripts and suitability for specific journals. You also need to think about the organizers of professional societies and their meetings that could highlight your new research and foster debate and discussion. You cannot, of course, forget funders as critical audiences, as they pay attention to where their funded authors publish and the attention given to the new research findings that they've bankrolled. Funders, along with publishers, want to make sure that grant recipients have met specific requirements that they may be putting in place, such as those related to submitting permanent identifiers for authors, for data, for institutions, as well as funding and publisher requirements for sharing data and materials. After you get published, you'll also need to think about the audiences involved in helping to get the word out to your professional networks and the public, perhaps through news and social media outlets. The point here is that you should be thinking about all these stakeholders, these audiences, throughout your entire research process.
So, to begin, when you're writing the cover letter, the first thing to remember again is that every journal is different. And it's not only that the journals have different specific requirements in their instructions to also, but there are other things that are different about journals that you need to bear in mind when you're selecting the journal and writing the cover letter. So, for example, there may be different editorial structures. A journal may have a staff of professional editors whose day-to-day job is to take in manuscripts, to read the cover letters, to evaluate if they're appropriate for the journal, and then to pass them forward to content specialist editors. While other journals don't have full-time professional staff supporting them, and your manuscript will go directly to an academic editor. So you can look on the masthead of the journal or on the website of the journal to see if there are professional staff editors or academic editors. Some journals also have consulting or reviewing editors who play a different role. So you should know when you're submitting to a journal what sort of editorial staff structure they have or editorial structure they have. There also can be different review processes. Do you have a double blind or a single blind review process where reviewers know the authors, but authors don't know the reviewers? That is, or an open review. So there are different review processes that different journals use, and you should look on the journal website to get an idea of what sort of process the specific journal you're submitting to uses. Journals also can be multidisciplinary, very broad in their scope, or they can be subject specific and more narrow in their scope. That means that the initial readers of your cover letter may have great, deep, detailed knowledge about your topic, or they may not know very much about your topic at all. It depends on the journal. So you need to be very clear on the scope of the journal and tailor your cover letter to that scope and to your best estimate of the expertise of the editors who will be reviewing that first initial cover letter. Again, the aims and scope of these journals differ. Journals may also have different standards for rigor and novelty. So you'll see we'll be going over details about the content and the newness of the materials that you present. You need to be very clear about the standards for scientific rigor as well as for the newness of the information that you are presenting to a particular journal at a particular time. Journals, of course, take different article types. You should be clear that the journal that you're selecting accepts the type of article that you are presenting. They have different word counts and word limits and limits for other things, number of figures, number of tables. But you should be clear that a specific journal takes an article of about the length that you are submitting. And there can be a host of other initial submission requirements that you should be aware of and that differ from journal to journal. There can be different page charges associated with journals and different sorts of copyright and license requirements. You should find all these things in the instructions to authors. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that for each time you're submitting, that you check and go over the instructions to authors to make sure that you have all the materials you need to submit to that particular journal, and that your cover letter includes everything that they might specifically have asked for in their instructions. So, while every journal is different and every editor is different, all editors want manuscripts with some similar characteristics. They want manuscripts that fit the requirements of the scope, length, article type, or other specifications. So again, you need to make sure that your manuscript fits all those as listed in the instructions to authors, that they have complete, correct, and properly formatted text and tables and citation lists. An editor can eyeball those things, can look at a manuscript and very quickly assess, is it in the correct format required by that journal. They want manuscripts and cover letters that are clearly written and free of errors. And they also want to be working with authors who understand the issues related to ethical standards in research and in publishing. And those are well outlined by these three groups that I have listed here: the Committee on Publication Ethics, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and the Center for Open Science, which focuses more on transparency and reproducibility. If you are not familiar with these three organizations, I strongly advise you to go and look at them and study their guidelines and look over the educational materials that they have. For your professional development, you should definitely know about these organizations and the links that they have to high-quality journals across the world. So, getting now to the cover letter. Remember, again, that editors are busy, whether they are staff, full-time professional editors, or academic editors. Editors are always going to be really busy. And they make some initial decisions based on three components. The manuscript title, does it capture their attention? Does it seem to fit the scope of the journal? The abstract that gives this super overview of the content of the journal and the content of the manuscript and the findings of the research, and the cover letter. So when an editor gets in an initial submission, they generally look at these three components, and if there is something that turns them off in any of those, that manuscript can go into the reject pile before even the editor has looked into the article in detail. That's called a desk reject. So very highly selected journals can take 10% or less as little nuggets of gold. Less selective journals might be a 30% nuggets of gold that editors keep, or even up to 50%. It depends on the selectivity of the journal. But certainly, without question, editors make some initial decisions and put some proportion of the manuscripts they get in initially based on just the title, the abstract, and the cover letter. So it warrants great attention for you to write a good cover letter to try and help smooth the way to get your manuscript to stay in the golden nugget pile. So the first question that I'm often asked is, should I write a cover letter when I'm working with authors? And the short story is, yes, absolutely, you should write a cover letter. No cover letter is not a good idea. It's a bad idea. Many journals require a cover letter, and many editors expect a cover letter. So one way or the other, you really should write a cover letter of some kind. A brief note that just says, here's our submission, hope you find it interesting, that is not useful to an editor. It's almost as bad as not writing a cover letter at all, so that's not a good idea. A super long cover letter is not a good idea either. Editors are busy and they want to get just the right sweet spot of information that they need to make a decision about the fit of your manuscript to their journal at that time. So a short to medium cover letter, 4 to 5 paragraphs, about 1 page. If it goes over a page, that's not the end of the world, but it shouldn't go too much over that. That's just about the right length. So what should go in a cover letter? And here's where we get down to the nuts and bolts. These are step-by-step instructions for what should go into a cover letter. You need to have basic information in the first paragraph, plain and simple. The title of the paper and the type of the paper. And that type of paper should match up to the types that are accepted by the journal. So if the journal does not explicitly say that it accepts review articles, then don't submit a review article. If it says it does not accept correspondence, don't put in correspondence or short reports. Make sure that there's a match. That first paragraph should also have the name of the lead author or authors with reference to the others. So it can be Smith and Jones, or Smith et al., or Jones and colleagues, but it should have the name of the first author and reference to collaborators. The correct name of the journal. This seems obvious, but every editor will tell you that they have multiple times come across cover letters that have the wrong journal name. What does that mean? That means that the authors submitted to a different journal. They were rejected, and now they've taken that same cover letter, slapped it on, and uploaded it into your submission system. So that gets the editor asking, why was it rejected from the other journal? And how careful and precise are these authors if they've made this mistake to have the wrong journal name in their cover letter? This happens relatively often, so do be sure that you have the correct journal name in your cover letter. The cover letter should be signed by the corresponding author and should have the complete contact information for that author, the corresponding author, and sometimes there are 2 corresponding authors, but the contact information should be there, emails and phone numbers as well. You can include the institutional affiliation in that initial paragraph. It isn't absolutely necessary, but it doesn't hurt either. So that's the basic information that should go in the first paragraph of the letter. So Here's an example. Dear Dr. Wu, as the corresponding author, I'm pleased to submit this manuscript, Best Uses of Artificial Intelligence Tools for Managing Harvest Schedules for Berry Crops by B. Metzetti, first author and all, for consideration as a review article in CABI Agriculture and Bioscience. So you've got the title of the paper, the type of paper, the name of the author, the correct name of the journal. This would be signed by the corresponding author. It doesn't mention the institutional affiliation, but it could. So that's the basic information in the first paragraph. That should be just the first paragraph. Then you can include some basic general background information that can help the editor to get some context for the submission. This, you may not have any information, background information that's important, but if you do, you should include it in the next paragraph of the cover letter. So something like, this manuscript is the product of a workshop that took place, or I was encouraged to submit this review article by editor so-and-so and hope that he will be able to review the submission. Things of that sort that give some reasoning or background to a submission. You can also put into a cover letter if your submission was invited after a previous version of the manuscript was rejected. In fact, this is a really important thing to put in to a cover letter so that the editors can go back and look at the initial rejected submission, and that it is understood when plagiarism checks are done, because usually those kinds of things are picked up as plagiarism checks. So those are the kind of general background things that you can put into a cover letter. Next, you should have a very short explanation of the content of the article, 2 to 5 sentences at most. You can take portions of the abstract or the introduction to your paper and rework those for the cover letter, but remember, the function of the abstract and the function of the introduction is different than the function of the cover letter. In the cover letter, you just want to have a statement of what the topic and the main content of the article of the manuscript is. So here are some examples. In this paper, we demonstrate that a highly invasive grass on the coastal wetlands, the common reed, Phragmites normale, can be controlled by livestock grazing. Our experimental field results show that rotational goat grazing can reduce the coverage of this species by 80%. There's a condensed summary of the content of the article into short sentences. You also should explicitly state what is new, what is the newness factor, or the novelty of the findings. Whether you have a small finding that's new or a big, huge, broadly impactful finding, you should state it concisely in the cover letter, 1 or 2 sentences. Even if you're doing a replication study, that is a new replication. So there should, again, be an explicit statement of what is new. Editors are looking for a novelty or newness factor, that's showing that your work is original novel research. So here's an example. Changes in soil microbiomes are one of the only legacies of large forest fires. Although this topic was studied carefully several decades ago, few recent studies have focused on the long-term change in soil microbiota. Here, in the context of broader existing literature, we provide a new summary of recent studies on microbiome changes in soil attributable to fire and related changes in forest ecosystems. So that's 2 sentences explaining what is new, giving context and explaining what is new. This is separate from the explanation of content. So there should be a statement that says what is new. You also should have an explicit statement of why these findings are important. Here's an example. Our findings show dramatic decreases in soil microbial biomass following low severity fires, while the diversity of microbial communities increased. These findings have direct implications for forest fire management and post-fire soil stabilizing treatments. So there is a clear statement of why the editors and the readers of the particular journal, here you would think that it's about soil microbiota, would find this information important and interesting. You also want to make an explicit statement about why this journal, why is this journal the right one for the manuscript? Why should the editors pick yours among the others that are coming in? So this is an incredibly important statement to make in your cover letter, one sentence, maybe two, and it should sync up or be aligned with the aims and scope statement of the journal itself. So again, you'll find those in the instructions to authors or other posted journal information. So here's an example. These findings would be of great interest to readers of CABI Agriculture and Bioscience, particularly applied scientists, resource managers, and policymakers who need sound science as a grounding for upcoming policy decisions. So you can imagine how that aligns with some of the stated aims and goals of this particular journal, in this case, CABI Agriculture and Bioscience. And then you also want to say now, why is it important that the editors select your paper to publish in their journal at this time? So our findings are timely and of broad interest in light of the recent fires across large segments of California, incurring great costs and natural resources to the health of wildlife and human populations. So these are the components that you need to think about when you are writing your cover letter. General background, explanation of content, what is new, why is it important, why this journal, and why now. Okay, so you also should include in your cover letter relevant ethical information. You should put in information about any other manuscripts that are related to the one that you're submitting that you may have posted on a preprint server or in an institutional repository. Other adjunct or complementary manuscripts that might be under consideration at another journal. And this is a very important point, so you should never submit the same article to two different journals at the same time. You can make a statement about that in your cover letter saying this manuscript is not under consideration anywhere else. But if, for example, you have a very specific methodology that you have written up, and the paper that you are submitting to this journal with this cover letter is broad, and you've written another very detailed methodology paper that wouldn't fit into this journal, you should mention that other paper to the editor. So it's a complementary but very different journal and complementary and very different articles. Those can be under consideration. That doesn't happen too often, but if that is the case, you should mention that other manuscript in your cover letter. And again, if there's an invited resubmission, you should mention the previous submission and give the manuscript number and the date. Some journals want you to include funding information in your cover letter. and or in your submission, so you should look for that, and also data availability information. Each journal has different requirements for that, but you should look and see what the journal you're submitting to asks be uploaded and be included in the cover letter. So here's an example. Please note that an earlier version of this manuscript was submitted to the preprint server, Agrit Archive, and assigned a DOI, and then list the DOI. So that's an example of an appropriate thing to include in additional information for editors in the cover letter. Also, you should include a declaration of the authors, that all authors have seen and approved the manuscript that you are submitting, the version of the manuscript that you're submitting, and if there have been any institutional reviews that the manuscript has had to go through, make a statement that it has gone through and approved through those institutional requirements. Here's an example of a sentence that covers these same kinds of things. This manuscript has not been published elsewhere and is not under consideration by another journal. All authors have approved the manuscript and agree with its submission to CABI Agriculture and Bioscience. As someone who has worked on a number of different large journals and seen conflicts that have come up with authors, because not all authors have seen and approved of the final version of the manuscript that's submitted or on the final author list, I can tell you from experience as an editor that this step is really important. You need to make sure that all the authors have seen that manuscript, that none of them have submitted a version of it anywhere else, and that everybody is on the same page about submitting your manuscript to your journal, and you make that statement explicitly to the editors. You also should have a statement about conflict of interest. In science, a conflict of interest refers to a situation in which financial or other personal considerations might influence or seem to influence the researcher's professional judgment or actions in conducting or reporting or reviewing the literature, the research that is being reported. So you should, in your cover letter, state either that no authors have a conflict of interest in relation to this submission and research it reflects, or if there is something that could be perceived as a conflict of interest, you should state it explicitly. So here's an example. Please be aware of a possible conflict of interest of author Jane Smith. Dr. Smith is the co-author of one of the textbooks mentioned in this paper and receives royalties from the publisher. In addition, Dr. Smith has received payment for serving as a wildlife guide in areas discussed in the manuscript. If you state those things out and you're transparent about them, then you're okay. If you don't state them and someone could perceive you as hiding them, then that's problematic. If you have a question about whether an activity could be a conflict of interest, you can contact the authors or just put it into the cover letter and be transparent about the possibility. You can also include the specific contributions of each author. Many journals are now requiring that level of detail. Sometimes they want it in the cover letter, sometimes they want it in the acknowledgments, and sometimes they just ask you to specify it in the manuscript processing system. Look at the instructions to see that. But if they do ask for it, put the information in the cover letter. Here are examples. Both authors, if it's a two-author paper, contributed equally to this paper, or you have the initials here. CJL carried out most of the research, BM helped to analyze the data, and MT contributed valuable ideas on the interpretation and helped to write the paper, something of that sort. Again, look at the published papers in the journal and look at the instructions to authors to see how they want you to lay out and identify the individual contributions of each author and put it in the cover letter if it is required there. And very importantly also, cover letters should also include suggested peer reviewers and excluded peer reviewers. You may need to include this information in the manuscript system itself also, but I strongly recommend that you include these names in your cover letter as well. So here you can say, we suggest Dr. Jane Smith as a reviewer. She's a recognized expert in the topic of this manuscript and is extremely well qualified to evaluate the work presented here. I or we have no professional connections with her, although we have met her at professional meetings. You should not shoot too high when you are putting suggested reviewers in. If you do not know someone who is, for example, a Nobel laureate, the most qualified person in the world to review your manuscript, don't put them in. Put an actual reasonable person with the expertise needed to review your manuscript. Editors will at times use one or maybe even more of your suggested peer reviews. You shouldn't count on it, but editors do look at these suggestions for a number of different reasons. So pick wisely and include those in your cover letter if the journal asks for them there. Importantly, also, you should also include names of reviewers you want excluded, that you do not want to be sent your manuscript for review. Most journals will honor those requests, but you should put a reason why you do not want someone who otherwise might be thought to be well qualified. You should be clear about the reasons you don't want them asked to be a reviewer. For example, here, Professor Pete Jones and his team are working on the same system as our group, but have a different interpretation of the findings. Therefore, please do not send our paper to anyone in that group, as they may not give an unbiased opinion. So you should both include wisely chosen, selected, suggested peer reviewers, as well as certainly people that you do not want to be given the opportunity to see your manuscript. So, in summary, always include a cover letter with your submission, concisely written with only the essential information, 4 to 5 paragraphs, about a page, a little over is okay, but not too much. The first paragraph should always include basic information, the article title, the authors, the correct journal name and type of submission. Then have a concise explanation of the article, the core findings, what is new, why is it important, why this journal, and why now. Explicitly state any conflicts of interest that one or more of the authors of the paper have, and if there are no conflicts of interest, state that as well. Include useful additional information that will help the editors to get context. Sorry, I forgot a close parenthesis there. Invited resubmissions, issues with data, postings on preprint servers or related manuscripts under consideration, and the names of suggested and excluded peer reviewers. those are the elements that you should have in your cover letter. And feel free to visually highlight important points by underlining or bolding or using italics. You can use your own voice in a cover letter. Although you have these elements that should be there, this is also an opportunity, unlike the formal structure of an abstract and the role of an introduction, you can use more of your own writing voice in a cover letter to let your personality shine through. Now, a couple of points before I end. The first is that many, particularly non-native writers of English, think that if they do get a desk reject, if their paper is rejected before it goes anywhere into review, many non-native writers of English think that this is because their English writing is poor. And I am here to tell you that is not true. The top reasons that articles are rejected, particularly desk rejected before they even get a detailed scientific review, is that the topic isn't new, that newness factor. If it's something that's already been done, editors generally aren't terribly interested in that. So that sentence in your cover letter that says why your article, why your research is new is really important. Articles are rejected also. A top reason is because it's outside of the scope of the journal. So you, again, go back to those instructions in authors, to authors, and make sure that your topic is squarely in the scope of the journal and that you articulate that when you're talking about the content in your cover letter. If the paper is better suited to another journal, that answering that question, why your journal, why this journal, this is a really important point to make because it's a high frequency reason that editors will reject a journal because they know of another journal that there's a better match with. So that articulating of why your paper, your manuscript is well suited to that journal should be really carefully articulated in your cover letter. If the paper is scientifically flawed, that's another serious reason that things are rejected right off the bat. And those kinds of problems are going to yield rejection in any good journal. If there have been too many papers published about the topic of your paper recently in that journal, that is another top reason that editors reject papers. So you should articulate why that journal, why now in that cover letter, but importantly notice that all of these top reasons for rejection have nothing to do with the quality of writing. It is the information, and even if your syntax isn't perfect or the style or personal tone isn't outstanding, if you convince the editor that your topic is new, that it fits in the journal, that it fits in the journal's scope, and it fits in the journal's aim, and that your science is sound, and that there's a reason to publish your paper now, those will help to keep your paper from being put into the reject pile and staying in with those pieces of gold that the editor wants. So language problems are when a manuscript is so badly written that the content can't be understood. That you can consider a language problem, but these other reasons for rejection of manuscripts are not language problems. They have other features that cause them to be desk rejected. So, before I go, I do want to let you know that in the CABI Author Services Author Education portal, we have a number of resources, this list in particular, that can help you to improve your writing if you want. And so you can go and refer to those resources. And also I want to encourage you again to read every journal-specific instructions to authors, because they're different. Every journal is different, so every cover letter has to be different.
Before we close today's presentation, I want to encourage you to visit CABI.org for information, publications, and education related to agriculture and biosciences. Specifically, I hope that you will visit CABI Agriculture and Bioscience, CABI's open access multidisciplinary journal. The journal is published in collaboration with BMC, Springer Nature's open access branch, and is led by an editorial board of top-ranking researchers from around the world. The journal is compliant with best practices in publishing for high-impact journals and is committed to publishing rigorously conducted science. We accept both primary and cross-disciplinary studies and those with broad global impacts, as well as studies that reflect more narrow, specific, and local applications. We are committed to thorough, fast, and fair peer review, and again, we're open access with links on both the BMC and CABI websites. I also encourage you to visit AgriArchive, CABI's preprint server. This is a free open access resource for unpublished preprint materials across all the agriculture and biosciences. It's hosted and managed by CABI, and there's no fee for submitting. Materials are posted within 72 hours after a quick review for appropriateness of topic, but the materials are not peer-reviewed, edited, or typeset in any way before being posted online. You'll also find CABI's Author Education and Services portal on the AgriArchive website. Thank you all for listening to this webinar, and if you have any questions or comments, please send them to me at p.benson@cabi.org. Thanks very much. Bye.